I'm very happy to be here and really honored to join this workshop. It's and thanks a lot for David for inviting me and for people who are organizing this this workshop. And I'll talk about this work that is actually, unfortunately, not related to consensus that we're doing at MegaETH on unblocking blockchains from the I/O bottleneck coming from this authenticated key value storages. And this is a mouthful of a title, so based on my learning from David, the shorter the title is, the more interesting the work appears. So I'll just call it Small Authentication Large Trie. It's actually the name of the data structure. It's called SOT. So I'll just, given the expertise of the audience, I'll just spend maybe 10 seconds going through this slide. It just talks about what is an authenticated key value storage, right? It's just a Merkle tree. And yeah, it's really frustrating that there are many different names of this primitive. Someone calls it AKVS, someone calls it authenticated databases, someone calls it authenticated dictionaries, but we're going to just stick with an AKVS in this talk. So what's nice about AKVS is that you have this commitment which you can use for, say, state settlements from layer 2s to layer 1s, light clients if people are still interested in this kind of stuff, and all sorts of interesting stuff, like for example, cross-chain transfers, right? You need to prove that something has happened or some state is true as of some block in chain 1 to chain B, so that you can, say, move money between the chains. But what's really sad is that maintaining those state commitments or updating those AKVSs when you update the underlying state is actually pretty costly. So what you're looking at here is a bunch of benchmarks we did. On the x-axis, we vary the amount of memory available to a Rust Ethereum execution client when it's running through, I think, 100K Ethereum blocks, mainnet blocks. And on the y-axis, you're seeing a breakdown of the time it spends executing those blocks. So it's pretty unfortunate that across the board, you are seeing that updating this AKVS taking almost 5.8 times to almost 10 times longer than just running through the transaction. So it's pretty funny, right? You spend, say, 1 second executing transactions, computing everyone's balance, and you spend 10 seconds updating the Merkle tree. And it's killing the performance of execution client. And that's kind of the motivation of this talk. And the reason that we know that Merkle Patricia Tries are the data structures that Ethereum uses as AKVS. So the reason that they are really slow to update is because we know in MPT data structure, each node is the hash of its children. And when you update a particular key, the thing you do is that each path in this Merkle Patricia Trie also represents like a snippet, like a segment of the key, right? So you chase the correct edges until you find the key that you're looking for example, 8 bad food, right? And then when you update the value, the key value pair, you have to really trace it back to the root to update all the nodes that you have touched. And it's these random disk IOs, because these nodes, they all sit somewhere on the disk. You actually cannot predict the path that you're going to access. So it's those random disk IOs that kill throughput. It's actually killing throughput, not just latency, because modern SSDs, they are much, much more efficient when you give it like a very regular serial work to work with instead of just throwing random probes here and there, right? And on the other hand, MPTs are actually kind of nice. They have some very interesting properties. One of them is they are history independent in the sense that the shape, the like internal construction of the MPTs only depend on the currently stored key value pairs, not the history through which those key value pairs end up being there, right? It's not dependent on the insertion deletion history. It's only about the current thing that you're storing. It's a very nice function of what you're storing here. So what it enables first, it enables straightforward and succinct non-membership proofs. Non-membership proof basically says that you want to prove that something does not exist in the AKVS. And also, it's very easy to reconstruct in the case that then the AKVS is lost, or in case that you are like synchronizing with a node, it's very easy to reconstruct the AKVS because you only need to get the leaves. You only need to get the key value pairs. You can do whatever you want locally instead of having to follow the history through which the data structure is constructed, right? And also, it's a pretty subjective matter, but having the data structure being a function of the content it stores is a pretty elegant feature. And also, by the way, MPTs, they also have very, very modest resource consumptions because it's just computing a bunch of hashes. So our wish list, sorry. Yeah, of course.
With regard to the previous slide, is this copy on right, or are you updating in place?
We are updating them in place. But same goes for copy on write, which can be even more random, the workload.
But the write workload would then not be random.
Yeah, exactly. The write would not be random, but then afterwards the read will be random. Yeah, so either way, yes. Thanks for the question. So our wish list, okay, so we want to preserve the two nice properties of MPTs, and we also want to minimize disk I/O, which is what's killing us for performance. So a crazy idea here is, what if we just throw the entire AKVS? Of course, we're not crazy enough to also say that we want to throw the actual key value pairs into the system, into the memory. But what if we can just fit the entire trie, the upper side of the trie, like the authenticators, to the memory? So then it's basically incurring 0 disk IOs. It's like cheating, but it's also pretty practical. So in order to judge if we can actually do that, the very interesting metric we have to look here is what we can call storage overhead or storage efficiency, right? It's the size of the trie, not including the actual key value pairs, divided by the number of key value pairs that you want to authenticate to, right? It's basically the per key cost for it to be committed to, right? So again, let's look at MPT. In MPT, we use a radix of 16. Here, radix parameter R tells you how many children, at most, a node can have. Suppose that there are n key value pairs, then in the ideal case, because we know that a node can have at most 16 children or R children. So one layer above the leaves, or one layer above the key value pairs, you are looking at at the minimum n over R nodes. And it goes on to the root. So if you add this series together, you're at n over R minus 1 in total. And that translates to 2.13 bytes per key. And we are assuming 32-byte SHA-256 hashes. And that's about 3.2 gigabytes for 1.5 billion keys, which is kind of a recent metric, a recent measurement of the Ethereum blockchain. So it looks pretty nice, right? But however, it's a pretty unrealistic assumption. And especially the unrealistic assumption is that we're assuming that every node, every internal node of the trie is having all of its potential 16 children filled up. We're basically assuming a complete regular tree, which is the dream of computer scientists, but it usually rarely happens in the real world. And the reason that it does not really happen in the real world is about key sparsity. It's about like the sparsity, especially down here. And it's because, remember that there is some meaning about the path through which you trace from the root to a particular node, right? For example, here, this node, the entire sub-tree of this node share the same prefix of the key, which is 0xDAT. And here, if you go one step further to this node, then it's actually dat B, right? So the deeper you go, the longer the prefix, the longer the shared prefix you are assuming. And you only have so many keys in your system. So if you go deeper and deeper, the number of children or the suitable keys you can find for a node is becoming fewer and fewer, and at some point it will just stop filling up all of its 16 possible children. So that's the logic flow. Basically, the deeper the node goes, the fewer keys it has, and the more underutilized it is. And the underutilization basically means that we have to find other keys we have to find other nodes to provide for the capacities which it's not providing, right? And here is some analysis. So we have some experiments showing that this analysis is kind of correct. We're kind of approximating a non-memoryless process and using a memoryless process. So it's at small, relatively small arity. It's not that accurate, but it's fine. So here, the blue curve is the real radix trie, 16 array, and it's basically taking about 16.8 gigabytes for the same 1.5 billion keys workload that was mentioned. So it's several times higher than the ideal case, right? So it's just one example. So currently, so as of now, we know that, okay, so we really need to reduce the size of the trie because 6.8 gigabytes, not even including any other metadata that you need to store, is not really realistic for, say, a low-end laptop to run an Ethereum client. So we need to keep shrinking the size of the tree. And one idea is that what if we just increase the arity of the tree? Because as you increase the arity of a tree, it flattens the tree and also it reduces the number of nodes. So would we just do that? And it's actually considered by, say, Merkle tries, which Ethereum considered to be a replacement of Merkle Patricia. I think the program, the plan is scrapped, but I think they were considering R equal to 256 radix, and or there are databases that are optimized for Merkle Patricia tries that are trying to pack enough, trying to pack a small sub-tree into a 4 kilobyte page on a modern SSD just to like make use of the unused I/O bandwidth. So, but unfortunately, these methods also don't work because as you increase the arity, it also increases sparsity. So it kind of cancels the effect. And this is one example. If you use 256 array, yeah, it works better, but still much worse than the theoretical optimum, which is complete trees. And actually, you can also do some theoretical analysis, and you can see that even if you keep increasing arity, at some point it saturates, which is actually quite interesting. The purple curve is the average overhead, averaged over trie sizes, and the shaded area is the worst and the best storage efficiency. And you can see that the best is kind of decreasing, but it's not decreasing as fast as the optimal case, and the worst and the average cases just stay here. And this is like a same figure zoomed out, so it's really converging here. Okay, so quick recap, we want to minimize disk I/O, and our crazy idea is to fit the entire authenticated, the entire authentication data structure in memory. But the problem is we want to really minimize the size of the tree so that we can fit as many key value pairs as possible given a finite amount of memory, right? And we saw the challenge, which is that radix tries, which are, say, MPTs or Merkle tries, they are sparse, especially towards the bottom, and they are inefficient. They are storage inefficient. So an insight here is that actually, even though the entire tree, when you look at it as a whole, it's inefficient because of sparsity, not the entire tree. It's actually not like it's not homogeneous across the board, right? What you can do is to like break down a normal radix trie by levels. So for example, here I'm showing in blue shaded area the first 4 levels of the trie, and the orange area the remaining levels. And after a certain point, the first 4 levels are actually filled up. You can see that the contribution of the blue part dies down. It only makes sense, right? You cannot fit an infinite number of key value pairs within a finite number of levels. So the insight here is that if you are willing to just use the trie for some certain number of, at least some certain number of key value pairs, the first few levels becomes very efficient. They are kind of converged to complete trees. So that's kind of the insight that we're taking here. And that basically says that an optimal data structure should be heterogeneous in the sense that the first few layers, they are going to be complete anyway, even if you just do our normal radix trie. So you just take it and just do a static complete tree. Just force it to be a complete tree, right? Just because you're not really wasting too much space. It's almost complete. It's almost guaranteed to be complete. On the other hand, the bottom layers, as we saw, they are pretty sparse. And when they are sparse, you cannot really afford to construct indexes over those sparse trees anymore because you are just throwing a lot of internal nodes for just a few key value pairs. So what you should do is to flatten them, flatten each sub-tree into a flat, open addressed vector or hash tables, depending on how you want to provide random access into those buckets. So again, you want a static main trie, which is almost guaranteed to be complete, so you don't really lose that much efficiency here, and a series of dynamic buckets that can deal with the sparsity of the key space. So this is kind of the main idea of sort. In sort, there is a main trie, as I mentioned. It's D levels, D is a parameter of complete R array tree. And here, each node in this tree is the vector commitment of its children, right? And the nice thing about being a complete tree is that it can be packed into an array, so no need to store pointers, so it minimizes the space cost. It's very easy to implement. The code is very clean, and also its parallel updates to this trie is very easy. I'll skip what is vector commitment. And OK, so below the main tries, you have buckets. Each leaf of the main trie corresponds to one bucket. So here, basically, we have we have R to the power of D minus 1 buckets, because there are R to the power of D minus 1 leaf nodes of the main trie. And each bucket is a vector, but the way you manage the vector, because you also want some pretty efficient random accessing to it, you manage it as a strongly history-independent hash table. And the fact is it's flat, as I mentioned, it's always space-efficient. It's just one vector commitment over the entire content of the bucket. No intermediate nodes to deal with, always just one vector commitment, always the same constant storage overhead. And the SHI property makes sure that the entire data structure is also history-independent, which is what we want. So I'll walk you through the insertion process. First, we find the bucket, and it's exactly what you would expect. You first hash the key of your entry into something hopefully uniform, and you take a mod over R to the power of D minus 1, which is the number of buckets, right? And that's the bucket you should be looking at. And then you just perform your normal insertion process into this SHI table. And after you insert, you will find that your key is inserted into some particular index into this vector, and that's your so-called bucket slot. And a sort key basically uniquely identifies a particular position in this data structure. Is like a combination of the bucket ID and the bucket slot. And then, of course, you have to propagate back the vector commitments all the way up to the to the root. And we use we use inner product arguments for vector commitments. OK, so there's actually something interesting that you also can do with this data structure, which is decouple authentication and storage. And this is what it is, right? So the observation here is that we've mentioned that we want to use SHI tables to manage those buckets, but actually they only need to exist in your imagination, right? It just defines, given a bunch of key value pairs that you have inserted that exists in this vector, what's the representation, what's the arrangement of those key value pairs when you want to compute the vector commitment? It's just for dictating how you should compute the vector commitments over a bunch of key value pairs. This is not about dictating the physical layout of the key value pairs. So what you can do is you can just throw in whatever, say RocksDB, LevelDB, any key value storage, and store the mapping from sort key to actual key value pairs. And that's it. So of course, this key value storage exists on the disk. The overhead is really small. In addition to the key value pairs, it's only 4 bytes of extra data for the sort key, for the key to the key value storage. And of course, the main trie, as we designed, we want to fit it in the main memory. So it's R to the power of D minus 1. Leaves is actually not R to the power of D minus 1. It's a series. But on that order, times 64 bytes per node. We're using IPA. And that's it. So the bucket exists in your imagination. Does not really need to exist physically. So there are some caveats. One is that if you modify, it's always in place. But if you insert or delete into the SHI table, of course, you sometimes have to move around existing items just to keep the SHI invariant. So sometimes you have to move around extra keys, but turns out that the constants is not an issue in practice. And also, what if you run out of space? It's fine. You can just add more segments, and you can also compute. You can also construct a tiny complete trie just for a particular bucket, because now it consists of multiple segments, right? It's easy. And membership proof, you just do a SHI table lookup and open the vector commitments. And non-membership proof, you also do an SHI table lookup. But it's basically what happens when you want to probe into a key that does not exist in your hash table, right? You basically what you do is search until you find an empty slot. So you kind of open all the slots that you've hit, including the first empty slot you have hit in a failed search in a hash table. And you open all of those in vector commitments. OK, so some analysis. We use R equal to 256, D equal to 4, and 64-byte vector commitments. And the main trie is about 16 million nodes. And that's about 1 gigabyte of memory footprint. And each bucket initially was also set at 256 slots. So all in all, it authenticates to about 4.3 billion key value pairs, which is about 3 times the size of a current day Ethereum blockchain, and that translates to about 0.25 byte per key value pair authenticated to. And the overhead stays below 0.5 byte per key, even if you start expanding those buckets, and it eventually converges to 0.25. And this is the comparison with all the schemes we have talked about, and you can see that SOT actually converges very closely to the theoretical optimum, because, yeah. OK, so I/O cost always 0, and in terms of the main trie, which sits in the memory, to the buckets, of course, you have to update the underlying key value storage, but it's something that you have to do when you execute blockchain transactions anyway. It's totally separated from the authentication data structure. And as I mentioned, during insertion deletion, probably more, but turns out that when the load factor of the SHI tables are not crazy, it's not too much. Computation cost, we're using vector commitments, so it's definitely much more expensive than just computing hashes, about 20 times more expensive than Keycheck 256. But we did some experiments. What's nice is that it's actually pretty parallelizable. So at 1 core, you can do 45,000 keys per second. Again, it's totally compute bound, right? There's no I/O happening. It's only about computing those IPA updates. And we're using a desktop CPU. It's about $500. So finally, some comparisons with other state-of-the-art constructions. First, NOMT, near optimal Merkle trie. It's basically a binary Merkle trie, but with nodes packed into 4 KB pages for fitness on more than SSDs. And also QMDB, it's basically packing a journal, basically the updates and deletions to your key value storage into a Merkle mountain range with garbage collection. And we're assuming that we're running the hybrid mode, which uses about the same amount of memory as SOT and NOMT. So benchmark numbers, SOT can do about 87K updates per second. I know it's different from the number I showed before. We did some updates. It's from a new experiment, new code. And QMDB about 63K, and NOMT about 40K. Disk space amplification, very small for SOT. NOMT, we're not sure. We didn't run experiments. QMDB, because it's garbage collected, it's basically a trade-off between amplification and your I/O. Computation overhead, definitely the highest, but it's manageable, and also it's very parallelizable. You can even use GPU. And random disk I/Os. So yeah, that's it. We talked about SOT. It's a new authenticated key value storage that scales to tens of billions of items while completely eliminating random disk IOs while being very space efficient so that you can fit the entire thing in the memory, which is the purpose. The key insight is that tries or radix tries are sparse at the bottom, so you want to flatten them into proper vectors and just use one authenticator for them. Optimal space efficiency for the in-memory stuff, it converges to complete trees, so it's pretty optimal. And the on-disk key value storage, we call it optimal because you can just use the state-of-the-art solution. We don't really dictate anything, right? You have all the flexibility. Reasonable computation cost, and it's been running live since day one of MegaETH testnet, which we launched earlier this year in March. And yeah, feel free to check it out. Thanks. I'm ready to take questions. Oh, yeah.
And do you have a similar slide with SALT? Just because that was very good to understand the latency
yes.
overheads.
So SALT, I don't have the. It's actually it's
this one, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's very labor intensive to run this experiment. So we didn't, but we have a qualitative answer, which is once we move to SALT, disk I/O is. We also test the disk I/O like bottleneck, but it's 3 times higher than what the EVM execution bottleneck is. So we have like a 3x runway before we run into disk I/O issue again. But then, even then, it's going to be key value storage access when you run those transactions, not when you are updating those commitments.
So you're not gonna hit this on the update.
At least for update commitment, it's fully disentangled from I/O, and it's all about computation now. So you just throw in more CPU cores.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Is the code available? Very soon. We hope to get to mainnet. Fingers crossed. Yeah.
But the testnet code isn't available.
It's not available yet, but we are actually preparing for audit, so it's shaping up. Yeah, it'll be available. Yeah.
Can it connect?
Yeah, of course.
Does it work for adversarial updates and key access?
Very good question. Yes. So there are at least two types of attacks. One is you try to increase the size of a particular bucket too much. And for that, we just rely on economic incentives. So we assume that as you expand the bucket, at least once you start to increase the insertion cost into that bucket. Yeah. And the other type is you can create pathological cases in particular hash tables, but that you can just use rehashes. You can add a nonce here, and once you're unhappy about the state of the hash table, you rehash it, you shuffle it. Yeah. Dalia.
Maybe in the interest of time, we can take questions.
Of course.
Thank you very much, Lei.